and thank you for joining us for the Measuring Results First Hours, Developing a Business Case for Rural Sourcing webinar. Before we get started, I'd like to go over some general housekeeping items. All attendees are in listen-only mode, but can submit questions at any time through the questions feature. To keep the momentum going, we will address any questions at the end of the webinar. We will also send out a copy of the presentation to you after the webinar is complete. Lastly, please find us on Twitter with the hashtag ConsultCollab, which is located at the bottom right-hand corner of the slide. We hope to hear from you. Our speakers today are Rebecca Wettemann from Nucleus Research and John Williams from Collaborative Consulting. Rebecca is responsible for directing and managing Nucleus's industry-leading quantitative research team. She has written and presented extensively on the subject of enterprise applications, CRM, collaboration, and integration technology and its impact on business. She is an expert on financial analysis of technology and is the author of numerous return on investment studies and reports. John is the Chief Strategy Officer with Collaborative and leads the Technology Services Practice and the Domestic Solutions Center. He has been largely responsible for the vision, launch, and growth of the company's newest and fastest growing business unit, the CSC. John is widely considered a pioneer and expert in the area of domestic and rural sourcing. Rebecca?
Thank you, Melanie, and thanks everyone for joining us today. I'm delighted to be here to share with you some thoughts on thinking about the business case for managed service models and thinking about evolving IT service models and how they can play a role in delivering overall IT performance and operational performance for organizations. For those of you that may not be familiar with Nucleus Research, we're an analyst firm headquartered in Boston. Been in business for about 15 years, focused on providing a case-based investigative approach to understanding the value that technology provides. And in fact, over the past roughly decade and a half, we've published hundreds of return on investment case audits where I'll actually go out and sit down with customers to evaluate the actual return on investment that they've achieved from their technologies. And through the course of that experience and sort of building up that experience of case study library with customers, we've certainly seen a lot of changes in the way companies think about managing projects, be they outsourced, internally managed, cloud, or otherwise. And so based on that and some of the work that we've been doing, taking a closer look at collaborative customers, what I'd like to talk about today is first what we see generally in the situation and how we've seen this evolve as companies think about IT management, outsourcing, and overall project management, as well as new IT service options like managed services and nearshoring. Talk about some of the Nucleus analysis around collaborative customers and some examples that we found there. Key benefits that we see from taking a much more value-based and managed approach to IT service delivery, talk about some of the best practices that we've seen, and finally some takeaways as you might think about a framework for evaluating your overall, not just IT budget, but the way it's allocated and managed across internal, external, and other resources. So with that in mind, what we've seen certainly over the past decade and a half is that views on outsourcing have evolved. Certainly in the early days, the idea of moving things offshore was largely motivated by lower costs. However, competition in those markets meant that costs went up. So it became a much more broader question than just the cost per hour. At the same time, we've seen a dramatic change in the way we view projects and manage projects. There are few one-off projects anymore. It's all about evolution and continuous improvement. At the same time, it's not just about the technology. It's not just about the lines of code being delivered. It's about usability. It's about integrating user testing at the right point, integrating user feedback, managing performance, and managing SLAs not just from a technical perspective, but from overall business objectives and business considerations. And finally, it's about the interdependencies between applications. There are no siloed projects anymore. many organizations are looking at a lot of interdependent applications and infrastructure as they think about any changes or new projects that they may take on. So the overall view and the number of considerations has made things increasingly challenging for IT. And what we see is that IT is also increasingly challenged to show value. As you think about what IT is challenged with today, everyone is an IT expert. The CFOs install a wireless network at their house. We download our own applications. Everyone knows what IT should deliver and has very demanding expectations. The same is true when we think about the CFO and thinking about overall investment and budgeting. They want to keep budgets flat so that they'll be able to show more success, show more return on investment for those technology projects. So IT is really challenged not just to account, but to show how they can effectively show success across a portfolio of competing projects that have different risk profiles, different interdependencies, and certainly different impacts on the overall organization. So if we think about that in context of thinking about overall views for IT today, we look more broadly at the situation for the way IT has to manage projects. We looked just a few years ago, particularly when we were thinking about outsourcing, cost per hour is a very straightforward measure. Pretty straightforward, pretty simple to calculate, pretty easy to negotiate. As we moved into more complex projects and more interdependencies, companies started to look more at project total cost of ownership, where they were looking at not just hours of coding, but infrastructure, communications, training, transfer time, internal charges, and internal personnel costs. That said, we were only part of our way on the evolution to actually managing and maximizing returns from our IT budget investment. Moving forward, we see companies looking more at the overall picture of return on investment, which includes not just a complete understanding of the total project cost, but also those business outcomes, the scope, those key levers that tell us if it's okay to extend the timeline for a particular component of the project because it will deliver greater ROI. It's about managing risk and reward and having a broader understanding of the project. So if we take that kind of evolution in perspective and think about return on investment in managed services, we find that just like any other line item in the budget, facing more scrutiny. And what we found in a number of cases in looking at other customers to reduce offshore resource delays, missed deadlines, increased concerns about data privacy and risk as we think about the overall risk and return of projects, but also reduce staffing levels internally. So again, IT challenged to show value, but also determine how to do more with less and be able to do that in a much more predictable fashion from quarter to quarter and not just project to project. In taking a closer look at this, we looked at the experience of a number of customers everything nearshoring. That is Collaborative Consulting's domestic solution center. We looked at some both public and private sector organizations, and they ranged really in size from small agencies to Fortune 50 companies. And what we found was really, really interesting. The companies that were making the most on the return on investment from services portfolios as a whole were really taking that overall return on investment to understanding not just the cost per hour, but the overall risk-reward picture, the overall return picture for each of those technology projects that they were using Collaborative to support. And as we dug down into the key benefit areas, we found a number of things that impacted various points in the application lifecycle and in the overall IT infrastructure. The obvious one, of course, is reduced or avoided staffing and overhead costs. but other ones that clearly look at the top line of the equation around reduced management burden, increased flexibility, increased employee satisfaction and retention, and reduced risk. One company, for example, that we looked at found that they were able to reduce those staffing costs by an average of 54%. But for them, the benefits from knowledge transfer by having a managed services partner and from just their own internal employee retention and avoiding the cost of recruiting and hiring new employees to refill those roles was a significant top-line benefit for them. It also enabled them to manage much more effectively business continuity by having both the knowledge transfer and those employees who were staying around and working collaboratively with the managed services team. So let's break those down a little bit. Reduced staffing costs. Certainly we found customers were able to reduce their costs, as I said, by at least 54% compared with the cost of on-site consultants. But more interestingly, perhaps, was when we looked at nearshoring versus offshoring. And what we found was that for most clients, it was a wash. Because, as I said, that internal employee time is expensive and knowledge transfer is so valuable, they were able to have faster time to productivity with their organizations and really be able to better manage the overall cost of their project. That also drove a real reduced management burden, enabling a significant productivity increase, but also enabling CDC to handle transition and really be able to reduce the management burden associated with projects. Other benefits, what we found really interesting here was that because collaboratives had relatively low turnover rates, often fewer than 5% as compared to double-digit rates, that they were able to really impact the cost of rework, flexibility, and productivity. And as we began to look further at the overall managed services picture, what we found was that the collaborative clients that really took a long-term view and looked at managed services, that looked at interdependencies and an overall portfolio management perspective as opposed to just a single project, were able to not just measure results more effectively, but be able to milestone for those results on an ongoing basis, to be able to understand far beyond hourly rates, to think about overall productivity and management burden, but also be able to look at their overall interdependencies, risk, and have a much more predictable time to value over time across their application portfolio. Because they had a longer term view and were looking at the evolution of applications, continuous improvement, and how they could leverage effectively the staff skills that they had built through the partnership to be able to maximize value. Part of evaluating the business case, we put together a financial that helps companies to measure and model, understanding both the difference between nearshoring with a collaborative model and moving from a tactical project-based approach to a managed services approach, and the annual net benefit and returns companies are likely to see based on the data and research that we developed in speaking with collaborative customers. So if we think about the overall takeaways and looking at the way things have evolved, certainly we've seen outsourcing evolve. What was once just a simple question of hourly cost is now much more than even total cost of ownership. And total cost of ownership is seen as a very restricted and limiting view from the financial decision maker perspective. They're looking for not just overall return on investment, but payback period over time, risk and flexibility, and how taking a longer-term view can help them to maximize the return on their overall portfolio investment. What we found in looking at collaborative clients is that IT can use managed services to scale limited resources, to smooth unexpected hurdles, but also to focus on outcomes and be able to communicate much more effectively as a partner to the demanding business users and financial users who don't accept project failures or challenges with applications as an acceptable limitation to business anymore. Key components to collaborative's value proposition included their management state, low low turnover, and the long-term sort of relationships that enable managed services clients to take advantage not just of staffing for a short term, but of resources, management, knowledge, and expertise over the long term. And finally, we found companies that were looking at overall ROI over a several-year period helped us to account for those natural spikes in activity, but also the complexity, the interdependencies between applications, the business factors that can impact success or delay of projects, and the strategic impact of projects, rather than thinking about it as a one-off decision. The research that we have published on the topic, as well as a number of resources around return on investment, understanding payback and risk, total cost of ownership, and other factors impacting application value, are available in the Knowledge Center on the Nucleus Research website for free download, and I encourage you to take a look if you're interested in reading more. And with that, I will thank you very much for your attention and turn it over to John.
Hi, Rebecca, thank you very much. I appreciate it, and I appreciate the nice summary of the value proposition that our Domestic Solutions Center and our service offerings in general have been able to provide to our clients, and in retrospect, in this evolving marketplace. It's a really quick overview of collaborative consulting. We're a 15-year-old IT services firm focused on helping our clients with some of their more strategic and challenging problems. We deliver our services in a hybrid model. There's a combination of local resources that are very well established, have many years of experience, averaging around 20, and a group of resources in what's known as our Domestic Solutions Center that Rebecca referred to a few times in central Wisconsin. The combination of these two organizations, we believe, delivers maximum value to our clients across a number of different IT service areas. What I want to focus on, though, isn't necessarily simply the evolution of our offering and the landscape that I believe has changed quite a bit in the last few years, introducing an onshore U.S.-based capability to deliver services similar to what has been done in the offshore model. But really, the decision-making criteria that clients go through, in our experience, as they become more sophisticated in the way that they buy services. As Rebecca referred to, the easy measure of service value is dollars per hour. It makes a lot of assumptions when you think about it, though, in that every hour, is not created equal. Therefore, dollars per hour is actually a very limited view, and only particularly valuable when you're looking at very simple, very task-oriented IT service type activities. As those services evolve, and as you think about more complex services, you need to think about more of a solution orientation than a task orientation. And outputs, such as deliverables, as where you measure the value, as opposed to hours being the litmus test. And then as you move on to even more sophisticated technology solutions that become more and more business-oriented, you really need to start thinking about business outcomes as the value proposition that you're describing for your IT services, as opposed to just simple task execution. So depending on the work complexity and the criticality of that business unit's need for that IT service, the measures with which you make your buying decisions and the measures with which you look at results change dramatically. I don't spend a lot of time quoting government documents, but this one I found sort of interesting from the Office of Management and Budget in the federal government. And the reason I found it interesting is this is almost a 10-year-old model that they put forward to think about the purchase of IT services. This is actually the technology service purchasing approach, if you will, for measuring the value that they receive out of IT service purchasing. And if you look at it, it actually mirrors pretty closely what we were just describing. That really, in order to understand the value of a technology solution, you need to look at the outputs, which are really technology or process results, and the outcomes, which are the business outcome you're attempting to achieve leveraging that technology. There's a fundamental challenge, though, that we all face as technology service providers and technology service consumers and delivery organizations And the technology alone very rarely solves the business problem. It's usually a component of the problem solution. And if you look at the three aspects of solving any given business problem, they include people, they include process, they include technology. Now, the federal government spends a lot of time spending money on big stuff, so they also consider fixed assets or assets in general, purchasing of equipment and software. But the fundamental premise still remains that measuring value of an outcome and the impact that an IT service can have on that business outcome is very difficult. We find most of our clients are measuring the result of the technology deployment and achievement against goals that are truly measurable and more constrained to the technology or the process being deployed, rather than really trying to figure out the impact on the business outcome. And we find that a very fair measure and, quite honestly, a relatively attainable measure, and one that can really show you the value of a service that you have delivered or a service that you deliver to your constituency. This is why we say, even in the managed services space, that the outcome is not necessarily, or even often, directly resultant in a business outcome, more a process improvement or a technology outcome. So with that in mind, there's another way to look at the continuum of service you might purchase and how it may apply to a particular challenge you're addressing. Most fundamental are cost controls. And anybody who's been in IT for any length of time knows we've probably spent the better part of the last 15 years managing cost and taking out costs from the IT equation. While that has diminished significantly as a driver for IT purchasing, it certainly hasn't gone away. And cost control and cost containment are almost always part of any equation when buying an IT service. Only in the rare occasion is cost not a factor. However, it's no longer a driver. Resource optimization seems to have emerged more and more. An IT services purchasing criteria. And it's really about looking at the internal resources, which are very constrained these days, and balancing that against the workload, and looking at services that you need in conjunction with that, and making sure that you receive optimal value from the people that you have on your staff, and looking at a lot of the ancillary tasks they perform or the secondary services that are with the business that they may perform, and looking for opportunities to outsource those who are more expert in those services. So resource optimization means human capital optimization has emerged as a big driver for IT service purchasing. Latest in the evolution has been the concept of continuous improvement. So more sophisticated buyers, and a lot of our clients, to be honest, are looking at the ability of a third-party provider to help them improve service delivery to their constituencies over time by being the expert, by not only just delivering rote services that are not necessarily differentiated, but looking at more and more highly differentiated services and ways to improve that business value and the delivery of that IT service to the business so they can better accomplish their tasks. So it's moving essentially up the food chain closer and closer to that business value proposition that everybody is pursuing by improving the delivery against the goals and objectives, not just getting the job done, but making the situation better over time. This has sort of forced the evolution of higher order IT services being delivered in a managed services model. We'll talk a bit about that in another slide or two. And then lastly, really driving innovation. So not just improving ability to deliver over the existing set of capabilities, but innovating new ways to deliver the service or new services that can be delivered. This is where you start to get much, much closer to adding business value by improving the performance of the business through technology. And this is where the marketplace seems to be evolving to, and certainly where our clients are taking us to, as far as the kinds of things they're looking for us to deliver to them in the IT services space. This is all, from our perspective, begun to evolve very rapidly the concept of managed services. No longer are IT buyers satisfied with purchasing individual delivery personnel, or even, in a lot of cases, singular projects. They look more and more to their IT service partners to deliver managed services where they take on more responsibility for the overall service delivery. And it's less about people, less about dollars, more about outcomes. If you think about that, evolution, I've been in this business for over 30 years. That's a pretty radical shift. It's not just at the IT infrastructure layer where I would argue managed services have existed for a long time, or in the call center space where, again, where managed service type delivery has existed for a long time. But more and more, it's moving to higher order services. So things like business intelligence and SharePoint platform management or collaboration platform management. Those are becoming more and more outsourced. And not because the people inside can't accomplish those tasks, but because the people in IT organizations are more focused on solving the business problem. So outsourcing the fundamentals of executing the business intelligence environment, managing, supporting that. Similarly, SharePoint becomes less core to what IT is trying to accomplish, and something that makes more sense to hand over to an expert that can deliver that service. And not by giving you two people who know business objects, let's say, but by giving you a service that meets a set of criteria that delivers capability to you and to your business. So as an example, in the business intelligence space, the evolution has been to essentially outsource the management of the entire business intelligence environment, from collecting the data, to positioning the data, to creating reports and analytics that can leverage the data at direction of the in-house IT organization, and doing it in a way that's described in a contract, an agreement, that charges for certain units of work over a period of time. So no longer the concept of individual contributors, but more about the concept of paying for a service. And while as I mentioned, some of the fundamental areas that has been around for a long time, in these new and evolving, more advanced service areas, it's relatively new to the marketplace. And to pitch the onshore concept a little bit here, something that's much more easy to accomplish when you've got the alignment of skills, capabilities, and communication that you have in an onshore model, as opposed to some of the more globally distributed models. Not that they don't work, but it certainly seems to lend itself to that higher collaboration environment the onshore model provides. If you look at the managed service solution space, if you go back a slide, apologize. Shouldn't have paused so long there. If you look at the managed services solution space, it's really can be delivered in, if you think about it, its own continuum. Competency-based, which is as close to sort of hiring people or capacity as you'll get, which is focused on delivering a singular capability. So let's say testing, or something along those lines, or perhaps just ETL deployment. So based on a certain finite skill set that you need to acquire that you don't have in-house, you might structure a managed service from a competency perspective. And there's component-based, which is really thinking about the larger problem and breaking it down to smaller pieces. So to help you with just the reporting and analytics part of the data warehouse, and not engage them to holistically manage the entire data warehouse. Then there's managed service, what we call fully managed service, where you're essentially going to turn over an entire problem to a third-party provider and ask them for a structured fee to meet a set of SLAs at a fixed cost per time period, discounting anything that has to do with capacity or headcount, and look to them not just to deliver you this service in the near term, but over time evolve the service, grow capability, and improve their ability to deliver this service to your constituency over time. Not worrying about any of the resourcing challenges, technology challenges, or anything else. Essentially just fundamentally asking for a service to be delivered to you and your constituency. That, in our view, is where managed services are going to evolve to. essentially taking that responsibility off your plate and paying a fee to have that work done for you. And that's what we see more and more of our clients today wanting us to provide to them and actually wanting the marketplace to provide to them. So if you think about it then, the IT buying criteria, while I think some of the fundamentals are still the same, is evolving as well. And in order to acquire services that are more akin to managed services, you need to think about purchasing differently. And instead of just purchasing capability, you actually have to look at several different things for your IT service partner to provide to you in order for them to effectively deliver the service. Business knowledge is becoming more and more important when it comes to IT service delivery. And not just understanding the specific business that you're entering into, but understanding the business climate and the business environment. The United States has a very unique business environment. Insurance here, pharmaceutical companies here, retail here is different than it is in other places in the world. Regulations are different here than there are other places in the world, and therefore having that understanding of the business environment and that immediate connection with the business problem is important, as well as understanding the overall business problem that you're trying to solve for within the context of the industry that problem exists. Those are becoming more important aspects of selecting a solutions provider. Technical skills certainly are still very relevant, and to be honest, for the largest part, globally applicable. But it's competency in the specific technical domains that's important and usually something that can be achieved, as well as the ability to think forward and consider new technologies that will improve service delivery. So it's not just about the today, it's about looking forward and envisioning what the future holds for this particular service area, as well as the ability to innovate new technical solutions from what's evolving in the marketplace. So no longer is it about statically knowing SharePoint or understanding some business intelligence technology. It's about looking at the marketplace proactively and continually suggesting to your partners where we need to get to in order to improve service over time. It's also about adaptability. And in our view, a strong training culture is key in order for a workforce to be adaptable. We talk a lot to our clients about high retention rate. We certainly like to keep our people on board for extended periods of time. But there's always going to be changes in staff as people grow and develop their own careers. And so you need to have the ability to continue the high quality service without necessarily always thinking about, do we have the same people on the development team throughout that continuum of service delivery? Can we adapt to a changing environment and train people to become just as effective and efficient in the model? And are there tools and technologies in place to allow that to happen? And again, how do we evolve that service over time as the needs of the business change, the needs of the market change, and the technologies available change? And of course, accountability. One of the biggest and most important aspects, I believe, to the managed services evolution is that the partner takes more and more accountability for the success of service delivery. So SLAs become critically important. A willingness on the part of both parties to commit to the risk and to share risk appropriately depending on responsibilities, as well as being fully responsible, respecting the IT service provider, fully responsible for service quality, not allowing quality to drop off without some sort of a measure of the impact of that and subsequent consequences for that. And then, of course, value never goes away, and price is always a consideration. So you can't provide best service at 3 times the competition. You need to think about how to improve the cost of service delivery by starting off with a fundamentally sound model that provides efficiency and effective delivery, and then evolving that model through the use of techniques such as approaches and methodologies, as well as accelerators that allow improved service delivery, improved service delivery speed. And then, of course, you have to measure it, right? It's becoming more and more important, and certainly in the managed service model, critically important to measure service performance. But not just service performance in terms of the fundamental execution of the service. That's only one measure. And there might be, examples of that might be simple as tickets processed or reports developed or workflows created in a SharePoint environment, a number of users under management, et cetera. So measuring that, are you performing the fundamental, the basic services that you've agreed to under the model, and is it accomplishing the task? But another, what we think more interesting set of measures are service adoption, because the true measure of anything in the marketplace is, do people want more of it, right? A successful product in the market grows market share, sells more units. So as you've entered into this arrangement and as you've started providing these services in a managed service model, are the consumers, the ultimate consumers, whether it be IT or business, are they looking for more? Has the service become a core aspect of what they expect out of IT? Is it expanding over time? Service improvement. So are we getting better at this over time? Are we reducing? Are we able to produce more reports? Are we able to manage more users with the same fundamental cost profile? So are we improving and innovating forward so that the service not only is statically acceptable and meeting its required SLAs, but accelerating in both adoption as well as the ability to deliver an array of services. So if you think about it in context, and you think about what we call the managed services evolution that's expanding to more and more types of IT capabilities, it's about providing more value. It's less about dollars per hour, more about the value you provide. It's about improving that value over time, and it's about expanding that value to new areas of technology that really haven't been considered in the past. With that, I thank you. I think at this point we're open for questions.
Yes, thank you, John, for that, and thank you, Rebecca. We've actually had some great questions come in through the feature here, the questions feature, so I will jump right in here. John, I know you touched on this a little bit, but I think this is a good area to follow up on, and this question seems to relate directly to you. What kind of services lend themselves better to a managed services contract?
It's a great question. I think it's an evolving question. As I mentioned a couple of times, there are the ones that have been around for a long, long time. The infrastructure-based services that were sort of begun to consider infrastructure as a utility. Certainly, the cloud has accelerated the delivery of services along those lines. But I think some of the services that I think a couple of years ago you wouldn't consider the services model becoming more and more common to see. People trying to, so business, I mentioned that, we're seeing a huge uptick in people's desire to leverage managed services to take the BI burden off of their teams and the technology burden of it off their teams and give that over to an expert service provider. SharePoint has evolved quite a bit in the last couple of iterations, but people still are challenged with how to manage that environment effectively, and so we've seen a big uptick in SharePoint as a managed service type opportunity. Those were a couple, but I think you're going to see more and more sophisticated managed service delivery that's closer to business problems than pure technology problems as this market evolves.
Excellent, thank you. I think sticking with you here, the next question is a good question for you. Can you describe or name a client who uses our domestic or rural sourcing solution center for managed services?
Well, that's a great question. First of all of the clients we have, the ones we can mention, the ones we can't, who are engaged with us in a managed service type model, use our domestic solution center. We found it to be a very cost-effective way to deliver the managed service offerings we have in the marketplace. Oftentimes they combine with the consulting team. Sometimes they don't, depending on where we are in the life cycle with that client. We do have a couple of clients, actually a number of different clients that are taking advantage of our BI service offerings, business intelligence service offerings, One of them I can mention is Millennium Pharmaceutical, or Takeda, which we've been working with them for years. Another client that I believe I have permission to mention is Analog Devices, where we've both done consulting. We've done consulting work, we've done application development work, and we actually are managing some of the applications that we built for them in a managed service model.
Excellent. And Rebecca, I think this question might be directed towards you. What metrics do you see clients using to measure the value of success of the managed services?
Sure, Melody. I think you know, there are always a set of KPIs and SLAs that companies think to, but from an overall value perspective, we see them much more looking at the average annual benefit over time, but also thinking about the predictability of those benefits. So being able to milestone and understand what I expect in terms of net benefits from a project and how far I'm off is increasingly becoming a measure of not just the overall value of management services, but the risk component involved. And one of the things we see certainly with managed services is that, as John mentioned, both the client and the service provider takes on that risk. So it makes that predictability a much more collaborative effort.
Excellent, thank you. And in the interest of time and giving a few minutes back to everyone here during their lunch hour, I think we'll take one more question. And it is a question that we get asked a few times. How can we get a copy of the value calculator tool? Throw that one over to John.
Sure. We have there are a couple different components to that. One is there's a guidebook that I think you know, if folks are interested in that, we could send it to them. It's more a, you know, the things that we have clients considering when they think about the cost of service. But the tool itself is something that is would be more than happy to sit down with anybody who's interested in taking a look at it, walking through the tool, and potentially even trying to look at one of their problems and model that from a cost perspective and comparative perspective in the tool itself. There's no cost to that. Something we would do for free, and we'd be more than happy to sit down with anybody interested if they want to send us their email and talk it through with them.
Excellent, thank you. And if anyone is interested in following up and having that sit down, you can fill out the survey at the end of the webinar and request follow-up, and we will make sure we set up a meeting for you. Thank you again, John and Rebecca, for your time today and for presenting on this topic. And thank you all to all those who were able to listen in. We hope to hear from you soon. Thank you.